Hello and welcome to the Ruslan Belov channel. The fighting on the front continues, and we continue to monitor and analyze the situation. Let's move to the map. So friends, tell me, what's going on in the Sumy region? If you go to Ukrainian social media and read the posts there, it feels like there's full-on panic, as if the Russian army has launched a new offensive in Sumy. Although, to be fair, this offensive has been ongoing since March. It never really stopped. The only difference now is that the Russian army has recently picked up the pace. Maybe that's why there's panic on the other side. Or perhaps it's because they've been painting the grey zone on the map as theirs all this time. Take Deep State, for example. That's a Ukrainian map. They didn't mark any Russian control in the area at all, only grey zone. And now suddenly we're seeing new map updates, and more than 100 square kilometers have come under Russian control. For example, American cartographers have acknowledged that Vladimirovka and Konstantinovka are now under our control. The total area of these two zones is about 13 square kilometers. Plus, the village of Vodolagi is next in line. American cartographers currently list it entirely as grey zone, but in reality, over half the village is already firmly and stably under Russian control. Right now, fighting is already happening beyond the village, and today a small new section was marked as Russian-held. The Russian army is trying to straighten the front along the Konstantinovka-Lochnia line. That's the task for the coming week, to straighten the front here and to begin advancing in selected areas. Which areas are we talking about? First of all, from Belovody to Yablonevka. And even according to Ukrainian reports, movement has already started there. Also from Vladimirovka to Novonikolaevka, and from Konstantinovka to Kondratievka. And we might also see the beginning of major battles for Yunakovka in the coming week, since the village of Lochnia is already under Russian control, and the distance between Russian positions and the outermost houses in Yunakovka is now only 300 meters. Currently, the Russian army controls 8 villages in the Sumy region, and over 100 square kilometers of territory. Ukrainian forces are also facing personnel shortages in this area. Let's move on from Sumy to the Kharkiv region. There was progress there yesterday as well. Remember 2 days ago I told you in a report that Russian assault units had crossed the state border and entered a new area in the Kharkiv region. They managed to approach and enter the village of Stroyevka and gain a foothold there. Not just a foothold, they took control of about half the village. Well, over the past 2 days, the entire village has been brought under control. Yesterday, video footage with the flag was shown. The next task now is to clear the area between Stroyevka and another border village, Dvurachansky. In addition, there's movement along the road heading south to the village of Kamenka. But I should say that for now, this shouldn't be viewed as something grand or decisive. It's more about creating an additional pressure point for the Ukrainian armed forces. They already have an acute shortage of personnel, and it's especially visible in certain areas of the front. These new points are being created specifically to exacerbate those shortages and make them even more obvious and painful. Let's continue. Before we move on to further developments on the front, I want to point something out. Have you noticed that over the past week and a half, we've been hearing about new settlements coming under control nearly every day? For example, yesterday 3 villages came under our control at once: Stroyevka, Redkodub, and the first Shevchenko. The day before that, Ignatovka and Konstantinovka. The day before that, Vladimirovka, and so on. This all points to a significant acceleration in our rate of advance. Even the New York Times, an American newspaper, wrote that the Russian army is advancing at its fastest pace since November. But I'd go further and say it's the fastest pace since spring 2022, because the gains we're making now will likely surpass those of November. We're on track to beat that number in May. But that's just additional context. Now let's talk about the latest advances. Yesterday we received good news from the Lyman sector of the front. Ukrainian forces were pushed out of the village of Redkodub. The advance was more than 3 kilometers. And we're not talking about open fields. This is residential territory. A flag was raised on the western edge of the village, and even Ukrainian map makers are now being forced to acknowledge it as under Russian control. The task of splitting the Ukrainian groupings, the Lyman one to the south and the Borovaya one to the north, has come much closer to completion with the effective advance to the Netrius River. This river, although small and not comparable to the Oskol, is still a natural barrier that will aid us going forward. Now the only question is where the next focus will be, south toward Lyman or north toward Borovaya. If we go south toward the city of Lyman, then the next targets are the village of Zelenaya Dolina and resolving the situation with Kolodezi. From Kolodezi, the road leads to Stavki, and from Stavki we can move directly to Lyman. And actually, I've said this before, the distance here is very small, just 10 kilometers from current positions to the city. But if instead of heading south, we shift the focus northward toward Borovaya with the goal of destroying the Ukrainian grouping there, then we can expect an advance into the Kharkiv region from this section in the coming days. By the way, from our current positions in Redkudub to the Kharkiv regional border is only 800 meters. I think the next week or week and a half will reveal a lot about how this section of the front will develop. All right, let's move on. In the Siversk direction, there are no changes, as usual. Same goes for Chasiv Yar, no changes there either. Various telegram channels yesterday reported that Ukrainian forces were finally driven out of the central districts. But in reality, we pushed them out of there 2 weeks ago, which I already mentioned both in this broadcast and on my Telegram channel. So that news is outdated. As for the current fighting in Chasiv Yar, battles are ongoing in the southern areas. But to be honest with you, I have no idea when this Chasiv Yar saga will end. Nothing seems to go according to forecast here. And by the way, regarding the settlement of Stupochki, despite the fact that quite some time has passed since the Russian Ministry of Defense declared the village under our control, there have still been no confirmations, no video footage with the flag, no footage of our troops in the village. Therefore, I do not consider this village to be in our control. Now about the Kharman area between Toretsk and Mirnohrad. After a series of serious collapses among Ukrainian forces, things have calmed down relatively. The main efforts are now focused on storming the northern part of the village of Zeria, where the Ukrainian forces are desperately clinging to residential buildings, and it's clear why they're holding out. If they're pushed out of the northern part and we take control of it, then there are no fortified positions between there and Oleksandr Kalinove. That's why, even though 80% of the village is already under our control, we are still engaged in heavy fighting for the remaining 20%. In the Pokrovsk direction, there's been some localized success. We managed to slightly improve our positions near Lysivka, specifically in the northern half of the settlement. The southern half is already fully under our control. We were able to cross the river and take control of the school building. The territorial gain is minor, only about 350 to 370 meters. But it's very important because the school was used by the Ukrainian forces as a fortified strongpoint. Now that this fortification is under our control, we can use it as a staging point to push further and try to take control of the entire eastern part of northern Lysivka. Overall, the past 24 hours were not marked by any grand advances. But you know, that's just the nature of the front line. One day we might advance by 40 square kilometers, and the next we might not even gain 10. What matters is that the front continues to move forward, and the initiative remains entirely on the Russian side. That's exactly why Zelensky continues to panic. Now that's all I have for today on the frontline situation. A few words on politics. Scholz once again allowed for the possibility of transferring Taurus missiles to Ukraine, but noted that this wouldn't yield quick results. Of course, it's within the realm of possibility, said the Chancellor, responding to a question from a host about the Taurus. But he added that these long-range missiles require several months of training for Ukrainian soldiers, and handing over the system 6 months or a year from now wouldn't help Ukraine today, and Germany wants to increase military support now. Let me remind you, Germany has allocated €5 billion to support the creation of long-range weaponry in Ukraine. Many, including myself, assumed that Berlin has decided to set up a major assembly line for Taurus missiles there. Alexander Kotz also wrote about this, saying it would essentially legalize the missile deliveries. Even if we assume the drone information is accurate, we're talking about €400 million allocated for that, another €2 billion for air defense. That still leaves €2.5 billion unaccounted for. And that could easily go toward reverse-engineered Tauruses. But even Die Welt doesn't know for sure, because, As the publication itself mentions, the contract contains classified sections. And what exactly has Berlin tried to keep classified in the past? That's right, the Taurus missiles. Kotz concludes, the Kremlin also commented on Ukraine's demand for Russia to present its memorandum with peace terms before the meeting in Istanbul on June 2nd. Russia actually proposed on Monday to meet in Istanbul and begin discussing the drafts. To demand things immediately or slowly, that's all unconstructive, said Peskov. Either confirm your readiness to continue negotiations, or don't, one or the other, he said. So far, Russia has not received confirmation from Ukraine regarding participation in the June 2nd Istanbul meeting, according to the Kremlin spokesperson. Recall, Moscow wants to present its conditions to Ukraine directly at the meeting. Kiev, meanwhile, insists on receiving them in advance. Also, there was news that the president of Serbia will block arms sales if there's a chance the weapons could end up in the hands of Ukrainian forces. Vučić stated that he will block any suspicious deals that could result in Ukraine being armed. He emphasized that all contracts with unclear end recipients will be reviewed. A joint working group with Russia has already been formed. Trump, meanwhile, wants to divide the world into spheres of influence between Russia, China, and the US, according to the New York Times. The American president may aim to achieve the deal of the century with Russia and China to divide global influence, the paper says, analyzing his recent actions. In such a scenario, each of the three major powers would dominate their part of the world, much like imperial rule in the 19th century. The publication views Trump's openness to recognizing Russian control over certain territories and a resource-sharing deal with Ukraine as part of a potential peace agreement, one that would effectively lead to partition, similar to what great powers did in the imperial age. Trump, on his part, has also been talking about Greenland, Canada, and the Panama Canal. Still, some of Trump's close associates warn against interpreting his actions and statements as part of a clear strategy. They're confident the US president doesn't have a defined vision for a new world order under American control. That's all for today, friends. Thanks for watching. Stay informed, stay sharp. See you in the next update. Take care.